of our theater clubs for people to have a chance to look back on them if they missed it.
Hi to the others, Amelia.
Mark, hello Mark, hello Emilia. Yes. Hello everyone. Phil.
Hello, folks.
Yeah. Because there have been, I'm just checking it right now, how many people have registered. And there were 23 people who registered.
Poetry. Who? Poetry is
yeah.
popular.
So I don't know how many of them are actually coming. But yeah. Heather! Yeah, so like a few more minutes so that we got at least half of the people who registered. Hello, Heather. So
Hello.
and let's wait to like some more people.
Are you in Morocco, Heather?
Oh, I'm in New York City. I just woke up. I just flew back from Algeria last night.
Right. Yeah.
So haven't brushed my hair. I just rolled out of bed and I'm late. So here I am.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Oh, hi, Annabelle.
Annabelle.
Hello.
Well, good to see you. Did see you for a long time. Yeah, it's like with Alex and Annabelle, you know, we're from the same, all together all the time. Yeah, I'm just, the guys are, I guess, from theater. I went home because there are no free rooms available anymore because the guys occupied all the other rooms. Yeah. Okay. I think
I just heard from James. He's going to be coming a little bit, just a few minutes late. So.
Sure. I'll have a little introduction speech. So my name is Vero, and I am president of West Association, World of English Speaking Theaters, for those who are first time at our theater clubs. We organize these meetings of theater makers every month, every first Tuesday of the month, and talk about different aspects of creating theater from artistic perspective, creating theater from administrative and managing part. Like we've talked about grant opportunities, for example, a lot about how to get funding for theaters. And every month we choose a different topic, and often we invite guest speakers to speak about this topic. And this time we are talking about poetry in theater and how poetry is connected to theater and how to make poetic theater and how to implement poetry in theater. And we have 3 guest speakers today: John Farndon, Tom Phillips, and Alex Borovenskiy. We will talk. I will introduce them a little more, and they will introduce themselves a little later. And I think this is how it's gonna go. We will give floor to each of the speakers to introduce themselves and to talk about their kind of subtopic, maybe for like 10-15 minutes. And then if were some questions to like during the speaker's speech, during the while the speaker was speaking, then we will discuss these questions together and move on to the next person. Yes, thank you very much, Alex, for the tip. West Association, yes, and it would also be really cool if each one of you as well renamed yourself with a name and the organization that you represent, if you represent any organization. Okay, so I think we can start. So first, I will give the floor to John Farndon, our dear longtime friend, poet, translator, playwright, writer, so many things, John. Yeah, I'm really glad that you are our friend, and yeah, I give the floor to you.
Thank you.
What did you want to talk about today?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Veronica. I'm very pleased to be part of this. Actually, it's always such a good initiative. And she's told you all what I am, and I'm going to do everything. So I'm not particularly choosy, but one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the overlap between poetry and drama. But I'm going to talk about mainly from a writer's perspective, because I think Alex and Tom will talk about more from a practical perspective. So I'll just kind of give a general introduction about my feelings about poetry and drama, and also about what I think is happening now, which I think is quite interesting, but in the relationship between poetry and drama. So first, I'm going to take you back. And for thousands of years, poetry and drama were deeply intertwined. And you all know the plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles and Shakespeare and Lope de Vega and Racine and Molière. Nearly all the great historical plays are in verse. And Shakespeare and Lope were great poets too. And plays were, in those historic times, heightened poetic vision that excited the audience through their imagination. But then gradually, the quest for plain-speaking naturalism and desire for truth to life drove poetry from the stage, and verse drama began to seem old-fashioned and pretentious. And that's in the 19th century. We saw Ibsen in particular and Strindberg, playwrights that were making theatre very much about naturalism. And that kind of drove a wedge between poets and dramatists. And for a long time, poets and dramatists seemed entirely different animals. And in the English-speaking world, at least, I don't know whether that's true in Ukraine and elsewhere, but poets retreated to their private realms and metaphors, and playwrights began to look for hard-edged realism. Of course, I know this is a sweeping generalization, and there have been many great exceptions. But by the end of the last century, poetry had almost vanished from the contemporary English stage, and poets wrote to be read, not performed. But the key thing is a change is gathering. Firstly, and inspired by hip hop and rap in the 1980s, poetry, and especially among young poets, is written much more for performance. And more poets are combining written word with elements of theatre, music, and storytelling to create a compelling experience for the audience. Performance poets use their voice, body, and language and stage presence to bring their poetry to life, using rhythm, tone, and emotion to engage and connect with the listeners. And so, as they do so, they're creating a kind of performance that has the power of immediacy, the speed of creation, the live engagement that often goes missing in stage plays, which can take years to bring to life and often seem artificially hidden beyond the footlights. So right now in the UK and maybe elsewhere, there is something of a revolution in theatre. And I'll illustrate it with an example from the Off-West End Theatre Awards, for which I'm a judge. And one of the categories that I judge is new plays. I'm going to overstate the case of this because I just want to get you all thinking. But over the last year in London, there's been a real dearth of great new plays. The best new plays seem tame. They're clever but underpowered, and they're more career-roos by the playwright than writers writing about something that really matters. As I said, I'm kind of overstating the case, but I struggled to identify worthy finalists. On the other hand, I saw scores of exhilarating pieces in what the performance piece category, and this is something that I created some years ago to recognize shows in which the performers use every tool at their hand to tell their own stories. These pieces can be powerful, inventive, immediate, using voice, body, media, music, and more to tell stories that really matter. Like performance poetry, this form of theatre is driven by those who find conventional theatre isn't telling their stories, including women and ethnic and sexual minorities. And at the same time, more theatres are again moving away from straight plays. And like Alex at Pro English, who can maybe tell you more later on, I'm sure he will. And they're looking for alternative inspiration that suits our turbulent times, and that includes poetry. Mimicking reality no longer seems enough. Theatre, as presented as a realistic tableau by actors steered by a playwright and director, can sometimes seem top down and stale. And with the world in turmoil, there seems to be a need for a more immediate, dynamic, artistic response than straight naturalistic plays can often give. Poetry is instant. A poet can write a great poem within days or even hours of an experience or event. And immediacy doesn't necessarily mean shallowness. Great and profound poetry has been pouring from the pens of Ukrainian poets over the last 2 years. And the terror of the events has stirred such feelings in many ordinary Ukrainians that they've turned poets because that's the only way they can express their emotions. And poets have a way of looking at the world which can be hugely inspirational for theatre makers and collaborators. And collaborations are reaping dividends. And I just want to finish by talking about a poem of my own, which I wanted to smash the boundaries, the screen between audience and words entirely. In this poem, The Silent End, the audience speaks the words, embodying them and living them through becoming the voices of those who have no voices, the victims who go unheard. And the audience don't intone in unison. To join in, they randomly pick a letter A, B, C, or D and speak the words indicated for those letters that the poem is recited, as if they were their own. That way, they hear the people next to them and speak other lines as if they're really speaking out. In other words, the audience become the people and the people become the cast of a play. The effect is very powerful. And I'm going to share a link to a video which showed the first rough performance of this at an environmental protest in London, which I led the audience through. But other times when I've done this poem, the audience take over completely. So I'll share that link and you can look at it later. But that's really, I've rushed through it and I've really, that's all I'll have to say for now. But I hope you'll come back to me and we'll join in discussions later on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Yeah, maybe someone already has some questions or comments that we can discuss right now before moving to our next speaker. If you do, you can just unmute yourself and speak. Oh, John, thank you. Thank you. I will definitely watch it. Okay. Yeah, Ben, yeah?
Hi. Thank you, John. That's really interesting to hear your perspective on it. One of the things that I'm aware of is that I'm poet, playwright, 14 other hats, because that's how we got to live now. And I think there's a very strong trend towards identity poetry, and the space for perhaps what might be considered more frivolous or playful poetry is something that I've not really seen have a space on stage yet. Do you have any sort of thoughts or reflections on that?
Well, actually, it's interesting you say yes, because there is a tendency for that kind of poetry to be quite preachy, and there might come a time when the audience will get tired of that. But what's interesting is I think that actually even in you say in Ukraine, you can see that over the last 2 years, then poets and dramatists are wanting to introduce a sense of humor, because you can't go on being grim forever. But I think that's also happening amongst playwrights in this country. I know a couple of poets that I know are wanting to create much more playful theatre. But it's really interesting just how much poets and playwrights and theatres are beginning to collaborate. I mean, I said that, and that's quite true of political plays. There's a kind of yen for political. I saw a play in London by a company called The Ensemble. It's a new company formed mostly by migrants, but they were telling a story about the oppressed in South America. But what they were using is multimedia that incorporated music, documentary, and poetry. And I think that that's a kind of these kinds of theatre, which are much more fluid, and they can include humor, they can include frivolous poetry, if you like, then I think are becoming more exciting and more relevant for current audiences, because we all see drama on the screen and it takes months to go and even plays, they take months or years to come into action, and sometimes they seem tired by the time they're on. And I think we want live entertainment, and actually poetry and live theatre become live theatre in a way that written conventional plays don't. They have that kind of immediacy which is engaging. But I think humour hasn't played quite as much a part as it could do, but I hope that's something that will come.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope you're going to start it, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to pass the floor to Tom Phillips. Yeah, Annabelle. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, just a little question, since we are still in the writer perspective and translator perspective, like the thought about the need in theater to have more engagement with poetry, since it is more immediate. It's very beautiful, and this is what I experienced as a director, because before, I right now exactly working on a poetry performance, which is exactly the reason why. But I'm a little bit worried that since the poetry is textually much more complicated, it has much more of a need to be deciphered and a need to be heard in the way that prose text is simpler. So how do you think, like, it's just from the perspective of translator and writer, how we can help audiences to really grasp the meanings when it's complicated because it's metaphorical, or there are a lot of symbols.
Well, I think it's interesting, actually. I've been doing a lot of translation recently, including a lot of translation of poetry, but I think it's a collaborative process, because there's a tendency, just like with plays, for translators to lock themselves away in their own room and not communicate. But all those things that you're talking about can be bridged when the translator collaborates with the playwright, with the original poet, and the theatre makers, and so you get a collaborative process. And so that's why I think my approach to translation is, I don't speak Ukrainian, but I collaborate with Ukrainian speakers. But what my skill is in making those metaphors, making those images, making the rhyme real in English and making it work so that actors speaking in English can speak it so that it seems natural to them, because sometimes translators don't understand what the actors need, and that's quite important. But I think one of the interesting things is that what you were talking about, those boundaries, is that people are becoming much more accepting of plays in in more than one language, in performances in more than one language. So it doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily need to say, this is a Ukrainian piece, this is a Spanish piece. We can actually bridge the gap and use places which mix Spanish and English, which mix Ukrainian and English. And I think there's a growing desire to have that kind of communication and not be stuck in our own little bubbles. And especially as I'm lucky in that English is a widely spoken language, and people across the world. And this whole group is founded on the fact that we can speak English together. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't include all the other languages, and I hope we do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Tom Phillips.
Okay.
Yeah, theater maker, playwright, co-organizer. As you've told me, you've been co-organizing different poetry, theatrical poetry events since like 1990s in Bristol.
Well, actually the 1980s, and in fact what's rather splendid is I see that Phil Smith is here, who was actually instrumental in helping me organize some of those events. So that's rather brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, so can you tell us more about that? How was it?
Sure.
And what kind of performances you organized?
Yeah, I mean, I was very interested to hear what John was saying about what's kind of happening in the UK now, and it's very much that. I mean, I haven't lived in the UK for more than 6 years. I live in Sofia in Bulgaria, and but I'm very aware of that kind of trend that John was talking about, and I think perhaps I can probably just talk a little bit about how that kind of came about in, from my experience as a poet, and specifically a performance poet and a playwright. And actually, I've never written a play which has poetry in it, but I think that the two things have, throughout my kind of writing life, have informed each other quite a lot. And so that, I think my approach to the way you tell stories on stage in theatre perhaps takes kind of ideas of collage, for example, or non-linear storytelling and that kind of thing, which you find in poetry kind of influences the playwriting. And also the kind of theatricality of theatre has influenced the way that I approach poetry. So in brief, I mean, basically in the 1980s, I moved to Bristol. I just graduated from university, and I went to some poetry readings, and they were terrible, frankly. And I thought, quite possibly we need to do something about this, because I did a reading in a library, I remember, in Bristol, with quite a famous poet. I was a support act, as it were, and two rather elderly people turned up, and swear that one of them spent the entire reading asleep. And it was kind of like, oh God, poetry must be more than this. And that's how my first kind of foray, and this is where the connection with Phil comes in Bristol. There's this great organization called Bristol Broadsides, which was championing effectively working class and marginalized writers. And I kind of fell in with a guy who was part of one of their groups, and we started doing poetry readings, events in the upstairs room of a nightclub in St. Paul's, and a kind of rough district of Bristol at that time. And downstairs were like the guys who went on to become Massive Attack, were like the DJs and stuff. It was all very weird to see these rather nice middle-class people tottering down a cobbled lane to come and see a poetry event. But the thing there, I think, which I learned very much was that, like poetry and performance works really well when it is collaborative. And one of the rules of the event that we ran there was that you couldn't just get up and read a poem. You had to do it with other people. So that was either with some of these Bristol Broadsides groups, or like the Black Writers Group of Bristol, or you'd find people making collaborations with musicians and so on. And so that was kind of one sort of strand of what I was doing. Then so we did that. And then in the 1990s, and I think this is one of the most influential things that have happened to performance poetry, and certainly in the UK, is that in the 1990s, the whole phenomenon of kind of slam poetry started. I don't know if you know what slam poetry is, but it's basically a kind of competition. It's a very light-hearted competition, and you win exciting prizes like a barrow or something. But I went to gigs then in the mid-1990s, this was, and it's extraordinary. It was like hundreds of people, and I was very interested in that point about Annabelle made about humor, because the whole slam poetry scene was driven very much by this kind of idea of humor and satire. And I think we all who were involved in that kind of, it was very strong and healthy in Bristol, which is this, again, the city where I was still living. And I think we learned a lot about how you present poetry, because you're in front of a live audience, and there were hundreds of people, like compared with the library with two rather aged people, one of whom was asleep. It was the completely different world. They were young people, and they were really enthusiastic and really engaging with this work. And one of the things I remember you mentioned in the kind of run up to this thing was about learning about talking about the way poetry is performed, and that I think there are lots of different arguments about the way poetry can be performed on stage. I know, for example, there are poets who will argue that the performance should be almost as neutral as possible, so that the audience has the space to respond to the poem, not as if the poet is shouting at them, as it were. And I can see that kind of argument. On the other hand, you also get this rather tiresome, predictable, rather declamatory, reverential approach. I remember losing a job at the BBC because I told them that their radio program, Poetry Please, was total crap, because it was just posh people over enunciating poetry. But I think there's something in the middle, and I think one of the things that I kind of found is that it's about performing, it's about getting at the energy of the language and the way people are using it. And again, Annabelle was asking about, well, how do you deal with complexity? Well, I also learned that you have to be complex in different ways, perhaps more theatrical ways. So in other words, if I'm performing a poem, the words might sound very simple, but it's more about trying to, when I write these kind of poems, about giving them having some kind of subtext, and so that actually what I'm saying may not be what I actually believe. And so there's also, I think, this kind of, where a lot of it is quite successful, is when you kind of develop a persona, in fact, which can also be one particular method of sort of dealing with poetry. But as I said, the other question about which is about integrating poetry and theatre. I mean, most of my experience after this kind of slam period was I ran a cabaret night where poetry was the kind of main thing, but we'd also have music and stand-up comedy and prose and people acting out short scenes, all sorts of stuff. And that seemed to be quite an interesting way of bringing different art forms together. And so you can create kind of, I mean, we were a bit chaotic, we weren't really planning this, but I mean, if you were sort of more thoughtful about it, you could kind of create really interesting juxtapositions, or also, more importantly, perhaps conversations. And like I say, those kind of performances, they would sometimes happen by chance. And, you know, when we took these kind of shows, mainly they were done in pubs and clubs and so on. But we did take them into what you call conventional theatres, and it was very interesting the reaction you'd get. And people would find these kind of connections and juxtapositions and so on. So I suppose those are the two things I really wanted to say, was I think that it's what poetry's potential is in performance, is in on the one hand, a kind of immediacy, I think, which John was talking about. You know, you reminded me, John, actually, when the 2003 invasion of Iraq took place, I got a phone call from an editor of an anthology called 100 Poets Against the War, and he said, "Could you have a poem to me in about half an hour?" You know, it's just like, oh my God, all right. Unfortunately, I managed to come up with it, and it was all right. So on that side of it, but also I think there's kind of this idea of collaborating, and I think what has happened, as John said, is that we've moved on sort of through the early days of experimenting around with collaboration, then through this kind of poetry slam period into what's now, I think, people tend to refer, performance poets that I know tend to refer to as spoken word. And there's this idea of you can create shows and so on around themes and whatever involving poetry. And that's kind of quite an interesting development. And, you know, there are people like Kai Tempest and so on in the UK who are doing lots of really interesting work about that kind of way of working. And, you know, as a playwright myself, I'm kind of toying with the idea of how do I actually build poetry into something. I think I have a vague idea, which is sort of going to end up like a kind of weird poetry musical. Or the other ways to come. I'm also quite interested in looking at the way of starting from poems that I've already written and seeing how you might be able to sort of elaborate or make or augment them in a way using theatrical techniques. So I think, again, I guess I'm probably really, I'd just like to emphasize what John said, really, and I think there's a really interesting sort of opening up of what had become sort of two rather segregated activities, which I think is going to be very good in the future, I hope.
Yeah, thank you. And I was wondering, Tom, how is, and I guess this is maybe like for Tom and Mark, because Mark, I think you are also in Bulgaria. So like this is a question for you, Tom, and for Mark, for both.
Well,
how
Emilia
is
is also in Bulgaria too, I should let her.
Yeah, how,
if she wants to say.
Yeah, amazing. Like, how is it in Bulgaria? Like, what is the poetry poetry scene and performative poetry and like theatrical poetry scene in Bulgaria right now? Like, do people stage such performances as like Annabelle mentioned, and like Alex does, like poetry performances and like stage poetry readings and poetry evenings? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can I please say something very quick, because I'm an outsider to your topic. I just got invited by Tom, and I thought I'd check it out. But actually, my brother and some other people started when I was listening to John Farndon talk about poetry. It reminded me of what my brother and another poet started. My brother is an actor. The other one is a poet. So they created poets and actors, or no, poets versus actors. What they do is they invite poets to read their poems on stage, and then the actors perform the same poets on stage, the same poems, in a kind of more expressive way. And then the audience is asked to vote who did it better. And it's usually the actors who win. But I think the benefit for the poets is that their poetry gets heard by a lot of people. So this was one example I wanted to share, and I'll shut up.
Oh, thank you. That's such an interesting concept.
It is actually not competitive, but I did. I've done quite a few performances last year, readings of my poetry, live readings of the poetry with live music and an Indian classical dancing, and the dancer was interpreting. Indian classical dance has very specific gesture, but they were interpreting the poem with Gale, and it gave an entirely new dimension to the poem, basically. And it's quite a really worthwhile experience. So something I'd like to do more. I think dance can be combined with poetry very powerfully.
Yeah,
yeah,
true.
I agree. I mean, you know, I'm glad you mentioned actors versus poets, Amelia. That's what sprang to my mind. I think, you know, I've seen those performances, and they're really interesting. Because especially it's kind of like you know, if you're a poet reading your own work, that's different from an actor reading your work, obviously. And I think sometimes, I mean, you know, there are some poets who are more cut out for understanding that. Then, you know, it's like it's a performance. If you see what I mean, and some poets can just sort of retreat into their shell like a snail and kind of not see it. They don't understand the kind of performance environment. Maybe that's something that I don't know. But no, in general, the poetry scene in Bulgaria seems to me extraordinarily healthy and lively. There's performances are probably what I would call a poetry performance are probably relatively scarce. There's quite a lot of poetry readings where someone will stand up and tell you how wonderful a poet is and not really give them the chance to actually read their poems, which is kind of like, no, please, shut up. I don't care how many prizes they've won. Just read the poems. You know, that can be a little frustrating, but there are lots of, I've had some really interesting conversations with younger poets, and I think things are kind of changing quite a lot.
Thank you.
I don't know that I have much to contribute. I feel like I'm emerging from a cocoon. Even though I've been in Sofia about 6 years myself, I'm not fully immersed in the scene, little ones and job commitments and things like that. So this is something that for me, and the reason why I'm here tonight is it's very much an interest of mine and something that I want to explore more. I have some opportunities in my career where I've worked with it, but it was fortuitous that we have people from Bulgaria here, because I was not expecting that initially. So that was very encouraging. We'll have to connect at some point, well, you know, the three of us, because I very much want to learn more. I do keep tabs on different performances and things, but I can't say that I'm really in the scene in the way that I'd like to be at this point.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And if you want, you can share your emails in the chat, and then we will get them all into the one kind of message and just if someone lost someone, we will just resend all the contact information later to the email that you registered to the Zoom with, so that you don't lose each other, and stay in touch, because that's what West is about, connecting people. Oh, there is Leo has a cat. Yeah, connecting people. Okay. Yeah, sure. Heather, you wanted to
Oh,
say
yeah.
something?
So I mean, I haven't done a lot of work with poetry in theater, but to speak to my experience and then some things that I've seen recently. So I have been in shows that one that someone created when I was in Virginia, of different poets and singers, and we were all characters in the afterlife, and she wove it into a piece called Strange Fruit, after the Billie Holiday song Strange Fruit. And then in New York, my dearest friend, he wrote a play for me, in which I played the poet and painter Mina Loy, and it was a play in which he incorporated a lot of her poetry into the play that was about her life. In terms of poetry competitions, I was in a festival in Zimbabwe last year, and a poetry competition was there. So the poets would perform their own work. I guess it was sort of in the poetry slam kind of realm, and there were judges, and I don't know that there were prizes, but there were distinctions awarded. And then most notably, really what was on my mind when people are speaking is just that there's so many different ways of using poetry, and creating new ways, even if no one's ever done it before, is very valid. And so I was in Canada performing, and I got to attend the Chutzpah Festival, which is a festival of Jewish arts. And they did a performance, and it was the first time they'd ever done it, where they had chosen 3 poems, and then at a summer festival, they had composers compose music to the songs. I mean, to the poems, and so that they could be sung. And then they had artists and the children there work with these things called crankies, which are boxes with long pieces of paper with images that tell a story that would go along with the poem. So they did a performance where they had people running these crankies, showing the visual of the story, and they had people singing the poems to go with the story. And it was quite lovely.
This is so sweet. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I think it's time. Alex, show yourself. Why are you pro-English theater if today you'll be talking about DSP theater?
No idea.
Or you'll
No
be
idea what I'm
talking
doing.
about pro-English theater.
Theater, schmeater. Yeah,
So
poetry
many
is much bigger.
theaters. So many
Yeah.
theaters.
Well, I do believe that any poetry has in itself much bigger than any theater performance can offer. And because, well, any poem is in itself is like a novel. It's so condensed, there's so much story in it, so much imagery and so on. So to take it into the theater would be a challenge. But before I go there, I just quick comment to Mark, because talking about getting out of cocoon, Mark, my team, most probably after the premiere in Germany and Amsterdam, I'm taking the guys to Romania and Bulgaria, most probably in summer, and we're definitely gonna hit Sofia, and we're gonna meet. And one of these team makers is Vero, because she is an actress. She's a great actress. She's gonna be there. Not me, but you're gonna meet the team, and we're gonna need your help and support. Anyhow, just a quick note.
Sounds great.
So we'll talk. Anyhow, yeah, guys, my name is Alex Borovenskiy. I run for English Theater of Ukraine, and I initiated West Organization. Then Vero took over, and she's doing much better job than I do with that, usually. So because I mostly wanted to get back to theater and run the theater and create theater performances as theater director. I didn't succeed. Associations still run after me more and more and more. Festivals and so on, but Right now, I am the artistic director and leading director of 2 theaters for English Theater of Ukraine and DSP Theater Community. DSP Theater Community is Ukrainian theater. So we produce performances in Ukrainian, and it's poetic performances. We don't do anything else. We only do performances based on poetry in Ukrainian. So my plan was for you guys just to, for the next 20 minutes, just to recite poems in Ukrainian to get you the feel of it. But then I thought, well, the role would kill me. So no, that's not what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get a little kinda lecture, quick one. Vero, I'm gonna need access to share on the screen if I may. Because several items. I'm actually gonna make it as a case study. I'm gonna tell you what we did, and feel free to put questions in the chat or just ask directly. So first of all, why? Why did we decide after theater in English to go with the theater in Ukrainian, in poetic one, purely poetic one? Like I say, we don't do anything else. I've been fascinated by poetry ever since I started talking, I guess. I loved it. I loved the rhythm of it. I was always quite good in doing poetry. My dad used to be quite good in reciting poetry. Taras Shevchenko. He was nice. I was always amazed. Can I do like him? And now I think I do better than him. But you know, that's the case. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason that I came to the theater quite late. I was already like 30 when I started just practicing theater as the student of drama school acting. So it's very late, very late. So basically in Ukraine, some of you guys know it's very hierarchical. You cannot enter the theater if you don't have diploma, shmiploma, if you don't know the right people, and you didn't do university 55 years and you're old enough to do theater. That's the plan in Ukraine, and I guess in many other countries as well. Hierarchy is there. It should go from generation to generation, from son to father, from father to son, and then you die. You know, secret knowledge of theater. That's the point. So I wanted to get there. I understood. I love it. That's what I want to do. I understood I'm a director more than the actor and so on and so forth. So I wanted to get my own theater, and I wanted the theater to get recognition. I basically entered from the back door. I created theater in English. They had no, you know, they couldn't protect. You can't protect from the theater in English. You should love it. Zelensky should love you because, you know, European Union and stuff. Then the other one, theater, poetical theater. The same idea, the same plan. As soon as this one was working, I used it. The second one, it's from strategic marketing point of view. Nobody does poetry theater. People do shitty poetries, do shitty, what do you call it, amateur performances, when they basically, and this is one of the main conventions about theater. What is theater poetry? What is poetry reading? You basically, you get up on the chair, you stand on the chair, and you read poetry, right? Then if you did it good, they clap. If you did it bad, they hit the chair and you fall. That's basically what's happening in poetry reading. And I did both as a kid. So I experienced both experiences. So kind of know how it works. I wanted to change it, not to fall down ever again. So I wanted to have a good one, something that the people don't do. Then principal theater. Okay, I'm gonna tell it. Then I wanted to get something that people don't do, because normally in theater, they basically, most of the poetry performances, it's about poets. So it's not so much concentrated on the poetry as so much as concentrated on the biography of a poet with his kind of poems on the way, along the way. One of the ways, most typical ways. In any country, I've seen it in Ukraine as well. Vasil Stus, let's talk about his prison, fighting against Soviets, and a little bit of his poems, because nobody understands how to work with poetry on stage. If it's not a chair, what do you do? How do you, okay, it's one person. What is the rest of the team doing at the backstage? Dancing, standing, waiting for your turn, you know, very difficult. It's basically a set of monologues. If you talking about this set of monologues put down into performance, or if you break it down, it's a choir talking, right? How do you make choir talking since it's not ancient Greece anymore? Big questions, pretty, you know, I think we found a way, and one day I'm going to travel the world saying the role, but for you guys are first one, so I'm going to share it with you. First performance that we did is called Vidrodzenia, and like I say, it's a case study. So Vidrodzenia is a biographical stuff. It's about Ukrainian poets of the previous century, 20s, 30s, and all of them, they are called Renaissance, because by that time, Soviets somehow decided that they should give Ukraine a chance, and they should put additional effort into Ukrainian language and culture and so on. And because Soviets were so big by then, it was just the beginning of the revolution, we felt inspired. We started creating like hell. Modernism came back. Postmodernism not yet, but Ukrainian poets started creating something very big, something European level. And then we have this term in Ukrainian literature study called short Renaissance, because Soviets shut them down. You know, right after we started creating stuff, they shut them down, all of them, pretty much. Like, you know, it took them 3 years, all of them dead. Some of them they shoot with one bullet just to save the book. And they were great guys. They would and could have. They spoke the language, different languages, European, many languages. They traveled to Europe. They used and utilized many different techniques. So it's like such a shame. You know, I wanted to talk about it, of course, being a Ukrainian, but I wanted to make it poetry performance, not biography, but poetry. So what I did is I'm going to share it with you, Vero. How do I do it? I do it? Oh, yeah, I do it. Okay.
You have a green, yeah.
Got it. I think I got it. Give me a second, ladies and gentlemen. I'll think. Ooh, that's very difficult. Sharing the screen is super difficult. Kudish. 1 second. Tell me when you see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. So this is the video trailer teaser of the poetry. It's gonna get glitchy. You guys know, so you're not supposed to really show the video in Zoom, but I'm gonna show you like 30 seconds of it. Try to, you know, bear with me with the glitching, because I really want you to understand the style and the form of it, and then I'll talk about the form. So let's try. It's the trailer teaser for my first poetry performance called Відродження Renaissance. 30 seconds.
Я сьогодні смертельно смутний, бо люблю і косе. Я люблю і косе. Я люблю і мені дуже подобається у білій залі слухати Шопена.
All right, we're going back. And this is, I don't know, guys, was it glitching?
It was.
I'm in a bucket. I'm wearing a bucket.
No, it was fine.
Okay, anyhow. Oh, I'm glad, actually. Yeah. It's also available at YouTube. You can check it out. So anyways, that's what I'm wearing right now is the form. And it's very important because the form for this performance, as soon as I found the form for it, all 18 poems of it, they started working together. They started blending together the stories of the poets that were shut down, that started blending. The idea is very simple, and it's very strange, because Відродження, Renaissance, if you say it in Ukrainian, Відродження, it sounds like Vidro, the bucket. The beginning of this word is Vidro, the bucket. Відродження means Renaissance, so I used the beginning of it, and playing with words, playing with the meaning of the poems is something that we do. That's one of the principles. We sometimes take the word literally, as Vidro, as the bucket Renaissance. And then, because it's a short generation, as you can see, these are the holes. So basically, oh, it's hard. I'll take it off. Thank you. That's little performance for you guys. So the idea there, it's like, it means, it gives you the form because the guys just put it on their head and walk around. And it means so much. It's your protection against society. It's your inability to see what's going on with the Ukrainian community being shut down. It's basically the Ukrainian soul being shot through and through and through years and centuries of oppression. But it's still wholesome. It's something that you cannot hold inside, because whatever you put into the bucket gets out. You put water, the water gets dripping. You put the sand or the Ukrainian grain, wheat, grain, it gets out. Because we are, we've been shot so much time, we barely hold together. We are pierced through. So there are so many, and as soon as you get this idea, you can work with the form only. All you have to do is put the right poems. And believe me, the guys had great poems. I put it together. That's still one of the best performances. It's out there since 2018, and we're still there, and we're still kicking. Annabelle, down there, is one of the actresses of Vidrodzenia, and she loves it. She doesn't like that many of my shows, but this one she loves. Thank you very much, Annabelle, for not responding to this. Yes, that was one of the cases. The second one, I'm sharing the screen again. How do I do it? Yes. And this one is not video, it's an audio, so you hear my beautiful voice talking, I think. Tell me when you see it. There's going to be a set of bunch of photos.
Yeah, we can see.
All right, so that's the second show. But the first one, as you guys, little by little, I got the principles, right? What poetry theater could be. First one was the form. You should get the one unified form, and it allows you to get heterogeneous poems like into one story. Second one was it? Oh, yes, the other side. That's what I call the other side. And it's still the form, as you can see, because the girls, it's only girls, 8 girls in the show. And the reason, because we are using the poetry of one poet by this time. Her name is Lina Kostenko, and she's one of the best, if not the best, female poet of Ukraine. She's still alive, she's like 90, but she was big in the 60s, the generation of dissidents and so on, and she wrote something that's iconic. Her poems are iconic. Her poetry is like, quoted in every family of Ukraine. But her poetry is very feminine. She writes like a woman. Oh my God, she writes like a woman. Yes. So anyhow, I decided to play with that, and I never worked with so many girls on stage. So 8 female actresses, 8 actresses on stage, wearing these nightgowns, really long, really traditional, and that was still the form, unified form. But then something didn't click. The form didn't work anymore. It was maybe too much unified or too much connected with what she writes about, and so on. Something didn't work. So I was looking for something else, and something else. I call it differently. Now I call it significant other. That's the other principle of poetry theater, DSP, that we do. Significant other means that we take something that doesn't belong to the form and the poetry, and we put it into the performance. You don't see it in the photos, so I'm just going to tell you. The significant other for us was the music, because yes, it's Lina Kostenko. It's very philosophical lyrics. She writes about war, different nations, oppressions, whatever. It's a good philosophical poetry, very beautiful one, sometimes lyrical. What we did, we used the soundtrack of Alona and Alina Pash. And these are Ukrainian rappers. You should hear the music. They're like, bam, bam. It's very upbeat, very modern, super modern. It's very fresh. It's been out a couple of years ago, both albums, and I used them. And this music was the contrapunct, something that counterpoint, that's kind of like get us open the generation, open the view for the poetry that made the very kind of classical. Lina Kostenko, she studied in schools. Kids study her and they hate her just for the reason of the schools. Everybody hates what you study at school, right? Well, because of the chair structure. So my idea then became to get the kids like it, because it's hip hop, because it's not, we don't do hip hop to Lina Kostenko. We don't change her poetry, but we do it as the music in between the acts, and somehow it's also started blending things together, because again, it changed the whole perception. The poems started sound differently. We didn't change the way we do poems. Poems are still the same, but because of the structure, because of this new significant other, it changed the way. And I like it so much, and I recommend to use it with poetry, because poetry is very structured. It's a form in itself. Every poem has this form, and as soon as the audience gets it, third poem, and they lose you. They got it. They understand. You cannot surprise them anymore with the form, because they got the form. What you can do is bring the significant other, whatever it is, an elephant on stage. Yes. You know, whatever comes to your mind, but it's not just whatever. I used Alena and Alina Pash because they are feministic and they are very strong. Lena Kostenko was one of the strongest voices of the generation, but she was different. So to me, using their music is kind of what Lena Kostenko would be right now. And I believe that if she writes lyrics, she would write for them. She would be their songwriter. So there is a choice, very specific choice that I make. And I believe that's the specific choice that you should make. Not being, you know, wowed by the poet, but look at the poet with much love and respect and think how this poet would sound right now. That's what significant other means to me now. That's what I'm sharing with you. And the third one, principle, for this, I'm going to just show you, I guess, again, sharing the screen. So the second performance, yeah? So, and this performance, by the way, is going abroad as well. We're taking it to Estonia in April. We finally started traveling, and I'm so super happy for the guys. So they will see the world. And I will be here crying in the corner. That's my plan. Tell me when you see this.
It's there.
All right, good. So this is my third, and I'm not afraid to say it, my most favorite performance, because it's the third. It kind of closes the, what do you call it, the trilogy. The first Vidrojnya, second Kalina, the third one's Tusanin. It's based on the poem poetries by Vasil Stus, one of the best poets of the previous century. He was allegedly killed by Russians in the prison already after Chernobyl. So, you know, they imprisoned him already back there. He was so much dangerous for them because he was so good and so, you know, so big for them. Allegedly, they imprisoned him 3 times. They sent him to Siberia, back to Ukraine, Siberia, back to Ukraine. Very tragic story of the guy. And his biography is big. It's huge. Only his biography led to appearance of 2 movies, lots of performances, and that's exactly what I didn't want to do. We used his poems only. And Vasil Stus, he's a poet of space size, I would say, scale. He's big. He is writing on a level, like, I believe that if sometime we're going to get the proper, honest evaluation of poets, he should be in 10, in top 10. Maybe not the first one, but in top 10, he should be. He's great. I am organizing the whole festival in his memory because there are so few translations. And John helped me a lot. And we, not only John and the guys, you also, well, many from the West Association helped reciting his poetry, translating his poetry. And we're going to make this festival annual because this guy deserves recognition. Anyhow, that's the performance that I did in 2019, closing this trilogy. And it's after 8 girls. You understand, you cannot work with so many female actresses anymore. You want a break. So I did the break and I was looking for masculine performance. 8 boys on stage. Somehow 8 is also the number. I don't know if it's a principle, but it's the number. 8 actors in every performance. Very, you know, what do you call it? Symmetrical. Yeah, that's the point. Symmetry. We do in this performance, the photos that you see are in school. So my dream did come true. We are performing for kids. The boys are naked. It's not that, that's again significant other. We're doing Vasil Stus, who is very revered poet. Everybody's like, ooh, Vasil Stus, oh my God. We take off the t-shirts and we're doing a lot of inappropriate things there, but it's all done for a reason. We want the guy to be taken down from the pedestal. We want him not to be the monument. We want him to be revered and listened to and read by the new generation. So that's what we did. And with significant other down there, we also used Rammstein. Rammstein music is the soundtrack, and it fit just perfectly. Ukrainian poetry by Vasil Stus, combined with Rammstein aggressive music and lyrics in German, somehow it clicked. And some people just say that they cannot imagine Vasil Stus poetry anymore without Rammstein. And I like it very much, very, very much. But the third principle, it's not this. The third principle is humor. Humor. And John mentioned it, and I heard it from the guys. Poetry in itself usually is not funny. If it's funny, it's bad poetry, normally. Poetry and humor, somehow they don't click. They don't combine. Well, at least, you know, there are funny poems, but in general. So you need to get humor, you need to find it. You need to look deeper, and sometimes it's not what the guy meant when he wrote this one. I guess not. And Vasil Stus is a very tragic guy, and he wanted to remain tragic. He built his biography deliberately. He had felt this mission to become a messiah, and and I respect it. But I don't go with that because I'm different. I'm not him. I'm a theater director. So we made a lot of fun of him. Nice fun, not mocking him up, but we made a lot of fun of the meaning of the lyrics, and it's very funny what we did. And we did a lot of fun in intermissions, in something that's kind of clicked together, in understandings. And all in all, this is the most popular. That's performance that gets audience just like that. They get the full house all the time. They love it. They cry and laugh at the same time so humor, third principle that I said, but also there are some principles that. Thank you. Very nice commentary. I got the humor. There are some principles that's out there that don't allow us to get into, doing performances or getting something that the poet, if he's there, would say, fuck you guys, I'm not, you're not using my poems ever again. One of this principle is respect for the word. Word is still crucial. It's still on top down there. We're still doing it in all the ways so the words are heard. If by any means words are not heard or are not clear, it's a bad act, or it's a bad direct, it's a bad whatever. If the soundtrack is louder, or somehow you stage it in a way so the words are not clear, it's bad. That we don't do it. So the words are on top of things. It's poetry. We based it on poetry. Then this next principle, skeleton. Poetry as a skeleton. We base it up on the poetries. Like in my performances, it's usually like 18 to 22 poems, and they put together, and I create the storytelling there, the storyline, but it's based on the poems. We try not to change the lines. We try not to. Sometimes we do, but very not often, like very seldom. We respect. We respect the original writing a lot. And yeah. Then there is strange principle, but it helps me a lot and just wanted to share it with you. The poetry should not be of a living poet. The poet should die. That's my principle. I'll explain. Originally, DSP theater was meant to be an abbreviation of Dead Poets Society. So the principle was there. I was so sick and tired of the young poets coming to me and saying, Alex, you director, do something about our poetry. I was like, no, thank you guys. So I came up with this idea to protect my psyche, that you should be dead or you should be Sergei Zhadan in order to be performed. But Sergei Zhadan is one of the most popular Ukrainian poets nowadays, and he's already back there. He's alive, well and kicking, but he's the sky inhabitant already to me. So you should be either dead or Sergei Zhadan. Vasil Stus is dead, so that's good. No, that's bad, but you get my point. So poetry should not be yours. Like I write poetry, but I would never put it on stage myself. When I'm dead, and you guys feel like, if any of you, one day, I'll be glad back then, but not early. That's my plan. But of course it is changing. It's the principle. I try to go with that, and the guys try to go with that, but it's not, like 100%. It's changing. Because in the end, the interesting thing, our poetry performances are no different from drama performances anymore. Maybe post-drama, let's put it this way. So they have the storyline, they have the character development. It's not like, you got it. It's just poetry. But it looks like normal performance. You can enjoy it. You don't have to tolerate from respect to the poetry. You can enjoy it as any poetry performance. So anyhow, we started getting something. There is the one monologue that I wrote, and it's now in the poetry there. There is this popular songs that we sing along sometimes, the pop songs that allow us to but it's all to get better attention to the poem itself. It's all for us to get the lyrics like drilled into your head. Not the lyrics, but the lines of the poem to your head. Everything else is for this reason, because, one of my main, and I guess the main principle is after the performance, the audience is to come back home and reread the poems anew. If they do it, my mission is completed. I'm happy. I drink wine, red, white, dry, my choice. Anyhow, the principle is that after the performance, they come back home and reread the poems anew, because we show them the new understanding. Kids like it because of rap, and they're like, oh my God, I need to reread it. Vasil Stus, they like it because of Naked Boys, but it doesn't matter. It's all a plan. And I like the plan because I like Naked Boys and rap, but it's all the plan to get them read it again. That's how it works, and so far it's been working. I guess yes, that's it. If any questions, yes, I almost managed to do it in time. No, didn't, but still, any questions? Happy to answer.
I have a question. Oh, yeah, Tom, sure.
Well, it's not really a question, Alex. I just really wanted to sort of back up your thought about it's about the poems and not the poet. I think that's really quite important, especially when you're in the kind of performance realm. And I mean, coming at it from theatre, I suppose it's slightly different in that it's unlikely you'll have the actual poet reading their work. But when I've got my kind of performance poet hat on, I kind of think, right, well, that's one of the problems with the performance poetry world and the spoken word world is that the focus is very much on the poet. So I'm just really interested to hear that you were, you know, kind of, poems are things in the world. They're not like a kind of prosthetic limb of me. And, you know, I teach creative writing at Sophia University, and that's what I'm always saying to students is, you know, you're making a piece of art. Yes, it can be self-expressive, but it also has to be communicative. And I think I guess that's what your comment made me think of, really. So thanks for that. I thought that was very...
Yeah, it's actually a very, very interesting topic because, I mean, we are coming into the era when classic playwriting is obsolete. When plays, as they are not going to be there, it's coming to devise more and more. A friend of mine, we did director's course, and he directed a manual for vacuum cleaner. He actually directed manual for vacuum cleaner, and he inserted some poetry into it, like literally into the vacuum cleaner. He inserted it. He didn't recite it. He put it inside and sucked it up. Very smart, very ingenious, I would say. So anyhow, we come in whatever, and poetry with the size of it, it's the perfect material. Like, you know, it's big, it's imagery, and so on, and it's immediate, as John says. Like a friend of mine, Maxim Krivtsov, a great poet of the generation, got killed on the 7th of January. The 3rd of February, we're putting out a performance in his web, based on his poems and based on the poems that the big guys of Ukrainian poetry wrote about. I'm not proud of it, and still very bitter, but I felt like I need to speak up, and I did speak up, and I could speak up, because poetry is immediate. That's very important, guys.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much. Maybe anyone else has some... John, yeah? You wanted to say something? No?
No. I was just thinking about everything that's been said.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Because I'm teaching poetry today, guys. In 15 minutes, I'm having a class, and I'm teaching Vasil Plus poetry to students, how to recite the poetry. So
yeah, because if no one has anything more to add, yeah, I think it's a good time to wrap things up and have our final regular selfie. So if you can, please turn on your camera. Yes,
and
absolutely.
Put the bucket on. Put the bucket on your head.
We will send the links to recording. We will put them on our Facebook and on our YouTube, and we will send everyone them to who was late. And now, yes, the final selfie. Smile as your, I don't know, Shakespeare. Shakespearean smile. Whatever that means. Okay, wonderful. Alex, wonderful, as always. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And yeah, hope to see you next month. Not sure what the topic will be yet, but thank you all for coming, and I'll see you on our next theater club, hopefully.
Thanks to everyone.
Have a good rest of your day, whatever your time is.
Yeah.
And
thank you, Veronica.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.